Welcome to Shaping Up Your Manuscript, a conversation with our editors from Lee & Low Books and Two Books. I'm Cheryl Klein, the editorial director at Lee & Low Books. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lee & Low and what we're looking for, especially in our New Voices and New Visions Awards. Then I'll hand the mic over to Jessica Echevarria, senior editor at Lee & Low, who will tell you what makes a great picture book. Then Stacy Whitman, the publisher of Two Books, will come in to talk about middle grade and YA novels and graphic novels. Finally, I'll return to offer some revision tips and ideas to help you succeed in our contests and in our general submissions. You'll see you can feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll answer what we can at the end of the webinar and in a follow-up blog post. If there's something we don't cover, feel free to ask. And we're recording this so you'll be able to play it again. This is our first time doing a webinar, so thank you for bearing with us through any hiccups and for your attendance and attention here today. So Lee & Low Books was founded with one mission: to publish diverse stories that all children and young adults can enjoy. Diversity is not a new thing or a trend for us. It is literally baked into our very existence as a publishing company. We were established in 1991 by Philip Lee and Tom Lowe. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. We are still family owned and fully independent, so we make our own publishing choices and publish what we like. Very much old school, actually, as publishers go. The awards our books have received have included the Cybert Medal, the Pierre Belpoy Award, the Coretta Scott King, just a whole grand list of awards and honors through the years. We have an ongoing commitment to keeping our books in print. We've put maybe 5 books, something like that, out of print in our entire company history. And our books sell in both traditional trade markets, like stores and online, and to libraries. And we also have a dedicated sales staff that sells books directly to schools, so they reach the kids who need to see themselves reflected in literature most. Because of our mission, our size, and our strengths, we always look for, first of all, great stories, fiction or nonfiction, featuring people of color. That is our mission and what we are here to do. As a rule of thumb, we don't do folk tales because those have been pretty well covered in the market before. And we don't do animal stories because, again, other publishers have that area covered. We do picture books for kids ages 5 to 12, which is a little bit unusual. A lot of publishers focus on younger picture books, but our books often speak to kids in schools, and teachers often use them as supplemental materials in their classes. We're comfortable with longer texts, back matter, all those good things. And finally, we look for novels and graphic novels of any genre for kids and adults, or kids and young adults, age 8 and up. We always want books that reflect kids' real lives and lived experiences, including difficult challenges like loss or separation. And we look for books that can tie into school curriculum. For instance, in social studies, we look for not just history and biography, but books that have faced contemporary issues like immigration, citizenship, voting, incarceration, activism, community. We'd love to find chewy texts, that really get into those subjects and figure out how to make a great story that speaks to children about them. We look for books that focus on science, including topics as wide-ranging as biodiversity and human anatomy, and the climate and nature, all of which we hope to see connect back to diverse people. And we look for books about math literacy and technology. We'd love to publish more in this area. We like books that have connections to disability or LGBT issues. We are very much in favor of intersectional texts that might deal with both more than one kind of diversity. And we appreciate bilingual texts. We have an entire imprint, children's book press, that specializes in publishing books with both English and Spanish text right there within the books. And we love poetry and novels in verse, because teachers do too, and we are glad to be able to serve them with this material. We love working with first-time writers and illustrators and growing the careers of writers and artists of color. We published the debut books of a really wonderful array of people, including Javaka Steptoe, who won the Caldecott Medal this year for Radiant Child, Don Tate, Paula Yu, Shudder Strickland, Zeta Elliott, Jean Airy, and many more. And we find many of these people through our 2 writing contests for authors of color, our New Voices and New Visions Awards. And if you submit to these, and if you meet the criteria for these contests, you can submit to them right now. You're eligible to enter the contest if you self-identify as a person of color or a Native Indigenous person. You're at least 18 years old at the time of entry. You live in the United States. And for the New Voices Award, you have not previously had a picture book manuscript published. You may have had a novel published, you may have had a nonfiction book published, but it's never been a picture book. And conversely, for New Visions, you've never had a middle grade or YA novel or graphic novel published. And we focus on authors of color because presently in the United States, 37% of the United States population is people of color. But despite recent gains, over the past 23 years, only 11% of children's books have been by or about people of color. And Black, Latino, and Native authors combined wrote less than 6% of the new children's books published in 2016. And all this happens at a time when 50% of U.S. public school children are people of color. So we sponsor these contests to help bring new talent into the industry and find great new voices ourselves. If you enter the contest, the winners and you win, you'll receive a cash prize of $1,000 and our standard publication contract. One honor winner in each contest will receive $500. For the deadlines, New Voices, the deadline is September 30th, 2017, coming up in about a month and a half. And New Visions is October 31st, 2017, so you have a little bit more time to revise. And winners will be notified by the end of the year for the New Voices Award and April 30th, 2018 for New Visions. You can see the full guidelines and submission information at our Writers and Illustrators page on our website. Please check it out. And if you're not eligible, it would mean so much to us if you would help spread the word to try to get these great new writers into the industry. And also, you should know we are open to general submissions that suit all of our other publishing criteria year-round. So if you're not eligible for the contest, please do still check this out at www.leonlowe.com, Writers Illustrators /writing guidelines. And I'm now going to hand the mic to our senior editor, Jessica Echevarria, who will talk about picture book craft.
Hi, I'm Jessica Echevarria, Senior Editor at Lee & Low Books and one of the judges of our New Voices Picture Book Contest. Every year, we receive hundreds of submissions for the contest and general submissions. I promise we read every single one of them. So I'm here today with some tips and examples of past winners that will hopefully help you in crafting a story that will stand out from the rest. So let's get started. Here are 4 things to consider before you start writing. 1, remember your audience. Whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, it's important to ask, is this subject matter or topic appealing to young readers? How can a child relate to your story? Think about universal themes such as making friends, dealing with disappointment, or the joy of discovering new things. Once you settle on a good topic or story idea, check out the competition. What else is out there in the market? Is there a book similar to your idea? That's okay. Check out the book from your local library and see how your story is different. Next, you want to research your topic before you start writing. If your story takes place in a particular time or setting, do as much research as you can. It will help you to visualize the story as you start to write. And finally, be sure to include this information in your cover letter. It helps us get to know you better, learn about what inspired you to write the story, and also that you did your research. Now let's take a look at some of our past winner and honor recipients to see what made them stand out from the rest. First up is our 2014 New Voices Award winner, Take a Picture of Me, James Van Der Zee. This biography of James Van Der Zee tells the story of a groundbreaking artist who chronicled the Harlem Renaissance and showed the beauty and pride of its people. The author starts the story with Van Der Zee's love of art as a young boy and the frustration he feels in not being able to capture people's portraits through drawing. But then Van Der Zee discovers the camera, and suddenly his whole world changes. His passion leads him to New York City, where he captures Harlem with the same care and love that he exhibited as a young man. The story shows the successes and struggles that he experienced throughout his life. This is just a snapshot of the full story, but let's see if it fulfills the criteria we outlined earlier. 1, is it appealing to kids? Well, we certainly thought so. Right away, the author establishes a scenario that most kids can relate to. This idea of discovering a new talent and also the frustration that comes with trying something new. Whether a kid is an artist, an athlete, or simply learning to ride a bike, they can relate to these feelings of excitement and also disappointment. We also liked that the story is about photography. Most kids today are familiar with digital photos and taking selfies, and we thought this was a fun way to teach kids about the history of photography and Van Der Zee's artistry in the medium. As for checking out the competition, there is no other picture book out in the market about James Van Der Zee, which is incredibly surprising given his talent and how some of his photos of the Harlem Renaissance are iconic images. We knew the story was a clear winner. But wait, let's take a look at the actual writing of the story, because at the end of the day, it is all about the writing. The story starts with, deep in the heart of Lenox, Massachusetts, in a white frame house nestled between his aunt's home and his grandparents' house, lived a boy named James Van Der Zee. The author sets up the main character and setting in one paragraph. Even without the illustrations, we could still picture the setting. Now let's skip ahead when he moves to New York. Far away from Lenox, the world was changing. Many Black families were leaving the segregated South to start new lives in big northern towns like New York City. James was ready for an adventure. At the age of 18, he took his camera and moved to Harlem. Whew! Compared to Lenox, Harlem was big, fast, and exciting. James had to hold on to his hat to keep his head from spinning. Again, the author skillfully establishes a change in time and place. Having personally worked with the author, I know she did a ton of research about Van Der Zee's life and this time period. She also listened to ragtime music, Van Der Zee's favorite, while she was writing. All this research shows. Look at the word choices and rhythm to the writing. The text is informative, but written in an engaging manner. This is what a good biography should do. Now let's look at the writing of the New Voices Honor recipient, The Three Lucys. The Three Lucys is a tender story about a young boy who worries about his beloved cats when he's displaced from his home during war in Lebanon. War is a heavy and hard topic to discuss with kids, but the author approaches the subject matter through the perspective of a young boy and his care for a pet. Again, this is something most kids can relate to. Here is the opening page to the story. On the hill behind her house in Lebanon, there is an olive tree. I like to sit in the shade of the tree with the three Lucys. Lucy the fat, Lucy the skinny, and Lucy Lucy. To the east, there's Snow Peak Mountain. To the west is a salty sea where I learned to catch fish. Now, north of where I live is a lush valley, and there's a lively city to the south. People call these places by different names. Sometimes they fight about who owns the land. But the three Lucys don't care about names and who lives where. They only care about drinking milk, running after birds, leaping into my lap, and sleeping in the sun. This is the author's first children's book, but it's a great example of realistic fiction. Through beautiful imagery, he establishes the setting, introduces the protagonists, and hints at the potential conflict in just the opening page of the book. Later, we see when the main character returns to his home after the bombings have ceased, the young boy has to process loss and grief. Let's see how the author accomplishes this. Each morning I call for Lucy, Lucy. Come, Lucy. Lucy the fat answers, and Lucy the skinny answers, but Lucy, Lucy never comes. Maybe Lucy, Lucy is still hiding to tell Baba. Maybe she doesn't know the bombing is over. 2 weeks go by. One day I ask Mama, is Lucy, Lucy ever coming back? Mama kneels beside me. Luli, I don't think we will see Lucy, Lucy again. Never, I ask? Mama takes a deep breath and nods. My heart feels as heavy as an apple falling from a tree. I love that last line. It's poetic and maybe a bit abstract, but most kids can understand that sense of heaviness and sadness. The writing also allows kids to think about sadness and how they would describe it. The Three Lucies is a great example of realistic fiction and how to handle tough subject matters. Now I want to shift gears and end on a lighter note. I want to share A Morning with Grandpa because we love fun and silly stories too, I promise. A Morning with Grandpa was our 2013 New Voices winner and tells the story of a curious and active little girl who spends the day learning Tai Chi from her grandfather and in turn tries to teach him how to do yoga. Let's look at the writing. Mei Mei watched Grandpa dance slowly among the flowers in the garden. He moved like a giant bird stalking through a marsh. His arms swayed like reeds in the wind. "What are you doing, Gong Gong?" asked Mei Mei. "I am practicing Tai Chi," said Gong Gong. "This form is called white crane spreading its wings." Once again, the author establishes the main characters, setting, and hints at what the story will be about on the very first page. This story is also a good example of humor and dialogue. Sometimes the hardest thing to write and read are scenes intending to be funny. What may be funny to one person may not be funny to another. There's no pleasing everyone. However, here are some pointers in writing humor for kids. 1, do not rely on cliches. The old slipping on a banana peel doesn't really work. Instead, appeal to the senses and things that are familiar to kids. Metaphors and similes are great for this. Regarding dialogue, it should sound like natural speech, but not imitate natural speech. By that I mean it should not be a word-for-word conversation between two people. If you listen carefully to people speaking, it's typically peppered with ums and like and long pauses. This doesn't read well on the page. You can insert those dramatic pauses when you're reading the book out loud, but it does not need to be on the page. So let's take a look at A Morning with Grandpa again and how the author achieves all of this. "Very nice, Mei Mei," said Gong Gong. "Now let's try play the lute." Gong Gong rocked backward and then forward. One arm went up while the other came down. He was a musician serenading the sunflowers. Mei Mei was a rock star, playing guitar for the daisies. Gong Gong conducted a quiet symphony. Mei Mei drummed the earth with hands and feet. "How am I doing, Gong Gong?" "Perfect, Mei Mei." Did you see how the characters showed the reader what happened through what they say and do? The author uses metaphors and similes to describe action. Here are those lines again. Grandpa moves like a giant bird stalking through a marsh. Mei Mei was a rock star playing guitar for the daisies. Mei Mei's energy is contrasted with her grandpa's calm demeanor. The humor is subtle but relatable to kids and also adults who know energetic little ones. So there you have it. Here are 3 wonderful examples of a biography, of realistic fiction, and a humorous story. My last piece of advice is to read lots and lots of picture books. Take note of what works and doesn't work for you. How has the author structured the story? Pay attention to the page turns. Your writing improves by learning from your peers. I hope this helps, and good luck.
Hello, I'm Stacy Whitman. I am the publisher of Two Books, which is our middle grade and YA imprint, and I'm going to be talking about shaping up your novel for my portion of the program. I'd first just like to second everything that Jessica said. A lot of what she said about picture books can also be applied to books for older readers. As we said earlier, Two Books publishes books aimed at ages 8 and up. We publish middle grade, which is for the target reader age range 8 to 12, ages 8 to 12, and we publish young adult, for which the target reader age range is 12 to 18. Now, people read, books for all ages, but that's just our target age ranges. We publish both novels and graphic novels for all fictional genres, and we are also interested in nonfiction, but the New Visions Award is only for fiction. For nonfiction, you'll want to check out our regular submission guidelines. So that's a summary right there of what we're looking for. Check out our submission guidelines online for more details. So what makes a two-book What makes a novel a two-books novel? Most of all, what we're looking for is a great story. We're always looking for good characterization, great plot, detailed world building, good pacing. But the books that stand out most strongly to us have a strong commercial hook with robust institutional appeal. I'll show you what I mean by that with some examples in a minute. But books that stand out to us have a strong voice. They absolutely must be well written. And a two-book has a unique perspective on the world. It has a point of view and isn't afraid to stand alone if necessary. I will note that we also tend to look for standalone novels and graphic novels, but with series appeal. So if the first book does well, we might be interested in a series, but generally we're not looking for a proposal for, say, a 7-book series. What we're looking for: complex narratives for high school audiences, strong voice in middle grade that connects with curriculum. We have a very strong school-focused audience, so we're always looking for books that connect with curriculum that teachers are looking to supplement, and books that engage with current events, history, speculative ideas such as fantasy and science fiction, and more with robust storytelling. We love genre fiction that also engages with issues, stories about historical events that few people might know about, and new perspectives on issues and events that haven't been widely considered. I urge writers to read the genres and age groups that they want to publish in. Take a look at our full list, and by list I mean the books that we have published. Go to our website, look at the books that we publish, check it out from your local library or buy them, read them, and see what we've already published so you can get a sense for what we love. But also look at what else is out there in the greater market. Go to your library and do a survey of other books like the book that you are writing so that you can get a sense of what's already out there, what your book might be compared to. Now I'll introduce you to our fall list, which I think really encapsulates everything we seek to publish at Two Books. Each book shares many qualities that we're looking for. First up, Rebel Soul by Axio, the 2014 winner of the New Visions Award. Rebel Soul is set in a futuristic Korea. It's basically K-dramas meet Pacific Rim in a sci-fi thriller. When Jaewon is assigned to partner with Tara, a human super soldier, he must decide where he stands, with the rebels or with a government that claims it will end all war. Note that the concept of the book can be easily summed up in just a few words. K-dramas meet Pacific Rim. There's a lot more going on to the book. You start out with what does it really boil down to? And then there's a lot, it addresses complex issues in a way that really hit you in the heart, that can really be summed up as well. Here's an excerpt from Rebel Soul. Now, this is in the second chapter, and Jaewon has already been at a concert with his friends, and he has run up against the curfew, and so he has to hurry back across the bridge to Old Seoul from Neo Seoul before the curfew so that he doesn't get trapped inside and get arrested. So right now he's in a cab, and he is talking to the ajushi, who's the older man who drives the cab, and he's addressing him, asking him to just get off there so that the ajushi doesn't have to go all the way to Old Seoul and get trapped there overnight. Ajushi, I say, looking at the cab meter and pulling out what I owe. I'm getting off here. The driver stops the cab and stares at me in the rearview mirror. In the middle of Banpo Bridge, he asks, I can take you the whole way. I give the old man the money, my right hand already against the handle of the cab door. I want to get off here. I won't charge you, he says. I meet his eyes in the mirror. Thank you, but I'm going to walk. Seconds pass before the old man nods, turning to take the money from my hand. I open the door. This bridge is famous, he says softly, his voice gravelly with age. I fight the urge to leave the cab, but only a punk skips out when an attaché is speaking to him. It is, I agree. It connects North and South Soul, Old and Neo Soul. Everyone knows this. I just love that line about how nobody but a punk skips out when an attaché is speaking. There's something ineffable about the voice here that really drew everyone on the New Visions committee in. And also, I had, as the editor who was going to work on it, a strong personal reaction to it because of my personal love of K-dramas, Korean dramas, which are TV shows from Korea. So there was a lot that hooked us. So specifically, what did hook us in compelling speculative fiction? It captured the voice of the target audience, which was science fiction for teens. It had a lot of entrancing relationships, not just romance, but family and friendships and found family. Jae-won had strong relationships with his best friend, well, complicated and strong. They were not always the best relationships, but the complications add to the depth of the characters. Ahem Sir by Supriya Kelkar is our next title. It is middle grade. It is set in 1942 in India, and it shines a light on the Indian freedom movement. Supriya worked on this book for 12 years. She did a lot of historical research on it, along with family history work, as it's inspired by the work that her great-grandmother did with Gandhi during the freedom movement. And here's a sense of the book from the first page. They wouldn't hang a 10-year-old girl, thought Anjali, clenching a small tin of black paint. She took care not to get any on the skirt of her saffron ghagra choli, woven with real gold thread. It was Anjali's Diwali present from last year, made from the most expensive fabric in the shop. She had picked it out herself, and she had managed to keep it as bright and crisp as the day she had gotten it, despite heavy monsoon rains that had drenched her little town in the middle of India. Hurry up, whispered her friend Irfan as he glanced nervously around them. Perspiration beaded around his collar near the black thread of his taweez, the necklace whose locket contained Quran verses. Clad in a cool white pajama kurta, he was more appropriately dressed for the muggy August weather than Anjali, but he couldn't stop sweating. We can't get caught. Getting caught vandalizing someone's property would lead to quite the punishment under normal circumstances, but Anjali was about to do far worse. She was about to vandalize a British officer's property, a British officer who was in charge of making sure the British Raj's orders were carried out in their town. A British officer who happened to be the former boss of Anjali's mother. In particular, I love how she sets up the scene right away in the first sentence, the first paragraph, the first page or two. She hooks me in with the age-appropriate danger, kids doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and also setting up the time period, giving cultural details. Just seamlessly, everything comes together in this first page. And we see the strong voice straight off. We get an establishing character shot as well. So what hooked us about the whole book? It's an everyday story set in a time period and place that few U.S. readers are familiar with, and it has current day connections. The resistance movement in India, the freedom movement led by Gandhi and many others, the passive resistance and nonviolent resistance that was so prevalent during this movement are very relevant still today. It immediately sets up a tense scene, establishing character and setting while moving the plot forward. It sets up realistic challenges for a 10-year-old. She's trying to change her neighborhood, not take on the world. Yet in doing so, it does help change the world. She changes her little corner of India, which in part, which lends to the greater movement. And it's meticulously researched, but uses details in service to the story, not for their own sake. And last, not a New Visions Award winner. I forgot to mention Supriya Kelkar's Ahem Sir also won the New Visions Award. It won in 2015. But I Am Alfonzo Jones, we found through, not through the New Visions Award. it is our last fall title to give you an idea of what we're looking for in contemporary fiction and in graphic novels. It's written by Tony Medina and illustrated by Stacy Robinson and John Jennings. We like to describe it as The Hate You Give meets The Lovely Bones. It's an unflinching graphic novel about the aftermath of a young man killed by an off-duty police officer. It addresses police brutality, excuse me, police brutality and demonstrating for justice and working for justice. So these are finished pages from the graphic novel. And if you're not an illustrator, just send the script. We'll go over that in a minute. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the finished project. We see Alfonzo Jones in his real life at school and with his hopefully potential girlfriend. There's some romantic tension going on there before everything changes and he finds himself on a ghost train. Now, highly relevant contemporary fiction, and there, as you saw, there is a little bit of a speculative aspect to this because Alfonso himself is a ghost throughout most of the book. But I also consider it highly relevant contemporary fiction. So what it does is it addresses a current day issue that affects readers in their everyday lives. Realistic characters, ghosts aside, everyone in the book is either a fictional realistic character or someone from history. And it has a strong voice with a specific point of view, and it is totally unflinching from reality. It plays with language. Tony Medina is a poet, and there's a lot of poetry in the book. It has these strong turns of phrase, literary and linguistic references. So I love that everything that I've shared with you today, these are things that I look for in everything that I look at. Excuse me. So these things that I'm telling you right now about contemporary fiction can also apply to fantasy and vice versa. This just gives you a sense, oops, going to the next slide, of what a graphic novel script looks like. If you need more guidance, there are some excellent guides both online and in book form. But I would just stress once again that if you are an illustrator, we would love to see samples like this with your submission. You can do character studies. We'd love to see sample pages. But unless you are an illustrator, a professional illustrator, don't worry about the art. We would much rather pair you with an illustrator who is a professional so that your words are shown to their best advantage. So just to wrap up, we're looking for strong voice. We're looking for a great story, and hopefully everything that I've told you today will help make your story even better. I'm going to pass you now on to Cheryl, who has some tips on how to revise your manuscript before you submit. Cheryl?
Hi, this is Cheryl Klein back again. I'm the editorial director at Lee & Low Books, and I'm going to talk through some ideas and techniques that can help you sharpen your work and improve your chances of publication, particularly if you're submitting to the New Voices and New Visions contest. First of all, do actually revise. Don't wait until the day before the deadline to finish the manuscript. I know it's really very easy to get excited when you finish a first draft and think, wow, that's it. This is great. Next step, profit. But truly, everybody's work benefits from revision, from taking some time to, finish a draft, put the manuscript aside for a week, then come back and reread it. What do you love? What still needs work? What isn't quite fitting? And this is also true when you're submitting to contests. Maybe you need the deadline to motivate you to finish a draft, but you should really try to pretend that deadline is 2 weeks earlier, and that will give you time to read through the manuscript at least once and correct any major errors. When we talk to our contest winners, they're almost always, no, actually they're always people who have revised. So you can take the time to reread it yourself, give it to a smart reading friend or a writing group and get their feedback. And even if you have time and you are not yet a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, at www.scpwi.org, they can hook you up with critique groups and critique partners who might help you get some experience feedback on writing for children and young adults. So do please revise and try to get another look at the book before you send it along. Step number 2, if you want to try to revise your work, write the flap copy. That is the copy that would go in the front jacket flap of a hardcover book, describing what it's about and why you would want to read it. This is actually one of my favorite exercises for writers because it forces you as the writer to look at your story from the outside and assess the big picture of it. Who is actually the protagonist here? What is the story about? Both in terms of what is the conflict of the book, what is the major action that the protagonist is trying to achieve, and also like what is the themes of this book exploring? What are you trying to do with the book beyond tell a great story? It makes you think about who would like this book and why, and that helps you position the book for readers. And this is actually a great technique for drafting a query or a cover letter, which you will also need to have when you submit a manuscript. So try writing the flap copy, and that'll help you get a sort of larger vision of your book. If you've written a picture book manuscript, then you should try paginating it. Most, that is, dividing it up into pages or spreads. Picture books are a really unique art form because the story unfolds in 3 dimensions and over time. It's not just this thing you can look at and absorb it all at once, like a painting on a wall. You have to actually spend the time turning the pages, and then and how fast you turn the pages affects your experience of the book. So they're just a fascinating form. And most picture book texts are divided over 32 illustrated pages. 1 page for the title page, 2 pages for copyright and dedication, then 14 spreads after that, and 1 single page at the very end, page 32. Try dividing your manuscript up accordingly. And here's an example of how that might work for using the text of Take a Picture of Me, James Van Der Zee, which Jess talked about earlier. So page 1, we have a title page. Page 2 and 3, we have a copyright and dedication. And then page 4 and 5, that is where the story starts. And, and when Jess showed that spread, it was a beautiful spread that really set the scene for where the book was going to take place. And then pages 6 and 7 develop the story further. And so that's a great model for you to think about, is like, how can you show a great spread that will establish your setting? How can you establish your characters? And how can you pace all of this out throughout the beginning of the book? And then as you take the text and you put it out over those 32 pages, that forces you to ask yourself, do you have enough story to fill out 32 pages here? Is the same thing happening over and over again? What is the narrative or emotional point of each spread? Usually in picture books, every spread has more or less one key thought or feeling to it. That's not a universal rule, but it's a good rule of thumb. So what is the key thought or feeling on each spread, and how does that spread advance the story? How can you use the page turns to create emotion? Like if you say like, and then he was scared of the giant monster, he reached out and opened the door, and then you have a page turn, then you're creating an emotion of anticipation and fear as the reader turns the page. And that echoes what the protagonist himself would be feeling. And that's an example of good picture book writing. And finally, you should probably delete these numbers before you actually send in the manuscript. Ultimately, the illustrator and the editor will probably work together to decide the pagination with your input. So it's not something you would necessarily have final say on. But at the same time, by doing this exercise, you'll be making sure that you have the strongest possible story that fulfills the structure of a good book. That will improve your chances with a good submission. And sort of the same thing exercise, but for novelists. If you want to improve your work, you can outline your novel. Just go through every single chapter, or scene if you prefer, and list the major events that happen in each chapter. And I recommend this just because when you read a novel manuscript, it's very easy to get caught up in the language and miss the sort of overall development of the plot. Like you're so busy concentrating on this beautiful sentence or this scene that you miss the fact that not very much actually happens in that scene. So if you make an outline, that allows you to step back and look at the book from a distance and see what actually occurs chapter to chapter. You can see if there are any events that are repetitive or redundant, and make sure that some kind of change takes place in each chapter. If it doesn't, you might ask yourself, do you need that chapter? And I will say also that not every writer will, I have worked with writers who hate outlining with a wild passion. And so this is not a technique that will work for every writer, but if it's something that works for you, it can just be a tool in your toolbox. So only do it if you're finding it useful. If not, then figure out your own techniques for considering your plot as a whole. And then for both picture books and novels here, ask yourself some of these big basic questions. First of all, what does your protagonist want? This is a great question because if your protagonist wants something, that creates an engine that can power your entire story. His desire will create stakes, because clearly if he wants something, then we're going to want him to get it. And then we'll be invested in his story because we want to see him get it. If he wants something, that forces him to take action because he'll have to go after that. And action is a thing we love to see in novels, more than somebody really just sitting around and talking or something. Another good question to ask is, where does the story start? It's very easy for books to do a lot of throat clearing before they get to the main action. As writers feel they must set up the situation, the characters, the whole world, and explain everything about them. That's not the most interesting way to launch a book. You want to start a book just before we can see the protagonist being challenged or changed. And especially, I have to say that if your character is like starting out the book bored, like he's like, oh, here we are moving to Dolesville. I hate Dolesville. I miss my friends, etc. If he's bored or whiny, we're going to find him boring and whiny as well. And so try not to start your character in that sort of negative space. And then on the flip side, from where the book starts, we want to know where the climax is. And where we want to see all the action come together at a certain point, where the major story action gets resolved. Can you identify the climax in your book, wherever it may be? All of these things about the character's desire, where the story actually starts, and where the climax, they're just great basic questions to keep in mind. Print out the text and read the book aloud. In fact, I also recommend changing the font and then printing out the text and then reading the book aloud. It's important to read it on the page because that feels different than reading it on the screen, and you're much more likely to catch any errors if you're reading it on the page. You can also record yourself reading it or have the text read to you. And this is really especially important for picture books because picture books are are most commonly read aloud by authors or by authors at their appearances and by parents and guardians and teachers when they're reading to kids. So it's really important that your books sound good as well as feel good. So how does the book sound? Where do you stumble? Maybe that's a sign that something doesn't sound natural and you need to fix it. What seems forced or what doesn't sound real? If you can read it out loud and think about it, that will give you an idea of where you may need to revise. Finally, when you are, to increase the probability of success with any submission, follow all the submissions guidelines given by the publisher. We have these guidelines for a reason because we get a lot of submissions and we want to be sure that we can process them in a clean way and have all the information we need to publish a book successfully. If you're applying to New Voices or New Visions, please check out our guidelines here and get the book in by the deadline. So, thank you very much and good luck with all of your submissions. And if you'd like to find out more about Lee & Low Books, you can visit our website, our blog, follow us on social media at all of these accounts, and follow twobook at all of their accounts as well. Thank you very much and have a good day.